Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Gross from the marketing team. Thank you for joining today's webinar about PQC-ready certificate management with Microsoft Active Directory Certificate Services and Sectigo. This is going to be hosted by Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer at Sectigo, and Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow at Sectigo. This section will be recorded. We'll send that to you after we wrap up. The Q&A section is open, and we'll save some time at the end for questions, so put them in there if you have any. With that, gentlemen, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. And Jason, what are we going to cover today?
Well, we're going to cover a lot today, Tim. This really is squarely in the subject of digital certificates and specifically, but not exclusively, private trust use cases, which is usually about authentication, Tim. That's typically what
Yeah.
this is about, but not exclusively.
All right. So do you want to just jump into it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So why are we here today?
We are here today to talk about something that's really important about our future. And it really is about the now. When I say future, it's about preparing for it. Preparing now and thinking about it now is going to start to pay a lot of dividends. Tim, you and I have said many, many times that one of the first ways that all of us need to start taking post-quantum cryptography seriously is to take inventory of all of your cryptographic assets.
Yeah.
And for many of you who probably have saw the title, signed up to this webinar, obviously Active Directory Certificate Services is probably going to be a major part of taking inventory of your cryptographic assets because it quite possibly is part of your legacy cryptographic asset systems, not the least of which is probably for purposes of authentication and other use cases as well. As it says in this slide, it's a critical component of a lot of PKI systems in Windows environments. So as we know, Tim, the challenges with Active Directory Certificate Services, it's like everything else with a system that is basically, I'm not going to call it deprecated, but the support for it, the amount of investment that Microsoft has been putting in, it's, this
Right.
system is long in the tooth, right, Tim?
Yeah, it was enough that probably 4 months ago, people were openly questioning in the media and the blogosphere about whether ADCS was essentially deprecated, right? And that no more development would go. Now, Microsoft did make an announcement that they would support PQC, but that was big because we weren't sure they were ever going to, right? That's how little sort of progress and change we've seen in this platform for a long time.
That's exactly right. And this challenge has been around a really long time. It's been talked about a lot more, as you say, Tim, just because people are looking at the future a lot more critically than they have been in the past. But the challenges with respect to especially visibility with respect to Active Directory certificate services. In other words, if you can't manage what you don't know you have,
Yeah.
knowing what you have inside of ADCS was always a challenge. And it doesn't say it on this slide, but one of the things that you and I usually talk about, Tim, when it comes to Active Directory Certificate Services, or what we used to call Microsoft CA,
Mm-hmm.
is that it really was never built for anything outside of the Microsoft stack. In other
Right.
words, operating systems such as Android, iOS, Linux, which are a very, almost ubiquitous part of everybody's enterprise IT environments, for directory certificate services was really never built for it. And very specifically, Active Directory Certificate Services was built and still works very well for anything that is Microsoft domain attached. And any of you who have signed up for this particular webinar, you know what that means. And if it's not domain attached, getting a certificate to that non-domain attached thing, well, it's kind of a hack.
Yeah.
Really, right, Tim?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess when MSCA was created back in the 2000s, a homogeneous Windows stack environment was a thing. And I just don't think it's a thing anymore.
Exactly, Tim. So this is it. There's so many reasons why people have been talking about ADCS recently. And I think that it's important to call out that modern PKI systems, things such as Sectigo SCM, Sectigo Certificate Manager, and its capabilities for standing up private certificate authorities actually can play multiple roles in how you might be able to either augment or replace your current ADCS. And that's really what this webinar is about.
All right. So I think we may have gotten ahead of our skis, which you and I often do on these things. But why don't we walk through the core components of ADCS?
Yeah, Tim, and I think the reason why getting over the skis is important here is because it's worth repeating that what are the the pieces of foundations of built into Windows of Active
Mhm.
Directory Certificate Services. And we're talking about things such as it will be a private certificate authority in itself, a CA. It will have enrollment services. It will actually have its own responder services. And of course, this is the most important piece here. The second bullet is that for any domain joined computers, we're talking about laptops, we're talking about servers, we're talking about anything that is joining the Microsoft domain system directly. Anything that becomes domain attached is usually typically the way that it's said. Basically, there will be certificate templates attached to GPOs or policies that you're able to get certificates out to through the infrastructure of Active Directory. And that's why it's called Active Directory Certificate Services and not just MSCA anymore. It really fundamentally works with on-premise Active Directory that we all know, and I don't know if any of us love it, but it's just part of that system that we all know and love. And that's why we call it on this slide foundational, because it really is part of that legacy and question mark deprecated system that still is in probably millions of systems today in enterprise worldwide.
All right. So, and the use cases.
Yeah, Tim, we talk quite a bit about authentication. That is probably the bread and butter number one use case. People stand up Microsoft Active Directory Certificate Services, Tim, so that Windows laptops typically can authenticate with a certificate into domain attached Windows systems. That's number one.
Yeah.
That's why those certificates are being issued most of the time. However, if you needed SSLs, basically, if you needed any kind of internal TLS certificate, that SSL term is deprecated in terms of private systems, for sure. But any other form of mutual TLS going on inside of your internal systems, it used to be common sometimes to fire up keys out of this to be able to have SMIME certificates as well as code signing certificates. These are probably much less used now from the standpoint of Active Directory Certificate Services, but guaranteed there are legacy systems out there, legacy enterprise systems that probably use Active Directory Certificate Services for something around this. And so quite often, it's not even for the certificate issuance. Quite often, it's for private key generation that generates these other certificate types, Tim.
And Jason, when you and I talk about PQC, we often talk about the challenges of legacy systems in particular. I think that would definitely be a concern in this scenario, right?
I would say, Tim, it's a concern for all of these, and that this is my attempt to not get ahead of the skis. There's quite a few slides coming up, Tim, where we are absolutely going to discuss how, if you're looking at these use cases from the standpoint of taking inventory of your cryptographic assets and asking yourselves which ones of these use cases are actually using either RSA or ECC based cryptography, which are the
Right.
ones that are most at risk for PQC, it's all of these, Tim. Every
Yeah.
single one of these use cases is at
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah. And they're all using RSA and ECC.
That's
Yeah.
it.
All right. So let's get into those slides that I'm getting ahead of. So here we are.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Tim, number one, we always call out where does Active Directory Certificate Services fall short? It's a lack of central visibility. The reason why this is a major problem with ADCS is because this was always assuming that you never ran anything other than Microsoft stack technology.
Mhm.
We're talking about 1990s era Microsoft, central to the world viewpoint. Tim, you were there. I lived in that world. And as far as Microsoft was concerned, there was no other operating system. Why would you need visibility
Yeah.
to a system that was foundational and you had nothing else to look at all day long?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
And so, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, with that lack of centralized visibility, now that you have multiple operating systems that are where Microsoft might be playing very niche roles, the problem is that certificates, I remember back, Tim, in 2000, you and I both go back a long time. There were analyst firms back in the day that declared PKI dead, back in the true heyday when Active Directory Certificate Services was being implemented worldwide. And I tell you, certificate usage from that point in time where PKI was declared dead had an absolute explosion of usage, became utterly ubiquitous, not just in Microsoft stack technologies, but in everything. And so, therefore, if you now have certificates absolutely everywhere, and your fundamental job right now is to follow guidance documents, including from NIST, and just not a country that doesn't have electricity that hasn't been saying, take inventory of your cryptographic assets. You're worried about what are the certificate expiration dates? What kind of compliance issues am I going to have starting in 2030 when RSA and ECC are deprecated? What is my ability to switch to MLDSA, SLHDSA, MLChem, all those other forms of cryptographic algorithms, Tim, that have become standardized by NIST? And what are my misconfiguration problems that plague Microsoft CA as well, that I'm going to have to try to solve within the next, as soon as possible, or within the next 5 years? We have a podcast, Tim, on our podcast that I think that it's worth mentioning here at this point, but podcast 183 specifically of the Root Causes podcast, and Tim, you're going to give reference to that at the end. It
Okay.
specifically calls out tools that you and I talked about that help to deal with MSCA misconfigurations, and it's a major issue. So, Tim, we could spend the entire webinar and maybe the rest of the day on this slide alone. But the consequences of certificates being utterly ubiquitous within your organization, the difficulty of taking cryptographic inventory, and the specific difficulties that come with MSCA, Tim, it's an enormous topic, and we're just here to ring the bell.
Right. And we're here to talk about post-quantum cryptography, which is a big change, right? I mean, one of the things, again, we've seen this with the legacy systems discussion, which is, maybe we've been kind of over wearing our welcome on, certain platforms and systems and pieces of software that aren't really getting updated and aren't current. And maybe we think, okay, they're a little long in the tooth, but what's the trouble? But when the need for post-quantum cryptography comes, that's where the trouble is going to be just very acute and immediate and undeniable.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about this topic
Yeah.
more now than ever.
Right. So quantum computing is coming, and what's going to happen?
Tim, a lot of people think that it's a tomorrow problem, perhaps a 2030 problem. A lot of people think that it's a problem that only starts once a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists. I
Yeah.
like to say, Tim, that it's a right now problem, because
Mhm.
we have to assume the bad guys, your adversaries, are recording packets that are encrypted right now across wires going in all over your enterprise. And anything that is going across that wire right now, you have to assume can be decrypted by the 2030 to 2035 time frame.
Yeah. I think you're
And if you
right.
haven't heard about the harvest now decrypt problem, Tim, it's something you and I have described in other venues, but it's a major problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And then trust now, forge now, trust later is kind of, it's really, it rhymes with harvest decrypt, right? It's a similar kind of attack focused on a signed document instead, or a signed lump of code for that matter.
That's right, Tim. Forge now, trust late. Actually, it's funny. It's funny how this is written on this slide. I now realize it's trust now, forge later is the way it should have been
Ah,
written.
yeah. Oops, we got it backwards. Yes, trust now, forge
Yeah,
later.
yeah.
Correct.
Trust now, forge later is the actual name of the attack. And really, what that means, Tim, is if you sign something right now with an RSA or ECC based certificate, right? Digital signing, either code,
Yep.
documents, anything that needs to be signed. What happens, Tim, once a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is available in the world to signed documents? We're talking about things that could be
Yeah.
HIPAA related, could be insurance documents, could be anything, Tim, that's living past 2030.
Yeah. Yeah. Any contract that lives on, right? Any. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And under those circumstances, the same kind of thing can happen, right? You can take something, you sign something today using existing cryptography, and with today's technology, it's undeniable that this is bit for bit identical to the thing that was signed. But in a day in the future, when I can go in and I can actually change the context of that document, the contents of that document without changing the signature, so it still comes up as a signed document, there will not really be a way technologically to differentiate between something that was signed in 2025 that is intact, identical to the way it was, and something that was signed in 2025 that has been modified. The two will look the same in the future, and that represents a big problem.
Tim, do you want to? I have something in mind that I want to bring up for those of you who have tuned into this webinar. You're active users and will be active users of Active Directory certificate services well past 2030. What is something, Tim, just kind of a trick question here. What is
Uh-huh.
something with regards to ADCS that is signed that will probably in many of your systems, I bet you more than half of the systems in the world today have something signed in ADCS that will live past 2030? Any guesses?
I know you're going for something specific here. I don't know what it
No,
is.
no problem. But so you're in the biz, Tim, right? And
Mhm.
and it's easy for you to scratch your head. Well, imagine for everybody else. That's why I'm going to highlight this. What about the root private key? Right? What
Oh,
what about the
hello.
root? What about the root certificate of
Sure.
your ADCS private CA itself?
Right.
That's signed. And what
Mm-hmm.
is it signed with? It's signed
Signed with
with either
R
RSA or
RSA.
ECC.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
To
Good
me,
one.
that falls under trust now, forge later attack.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And then any leaf certs you have that come off that route and anything they've done, right? So if I've been signing documents with those leaf certs, if I've been signing code with those leaf certs, once those leaf certs are compromised, how do you trust the things they signed either?
Tim, I think we just came up with our next podcast
Oh,
idea.
good.
There you
Oh,
go.
good. To add it to the long list. And then this last point about the need for automation, Jay. So, one of the things, and I'm not quite sure if this is where you're going with this slide, so I'll let you talk to it, but one of the things that I try to emphasize a lot when I'm talking to people about this is we're moving into an era where we really need full, constant high level of crypto agility. Because this change that's coming up now with post quantum cryptography is not going to be the last one that happens in our careers. And we need to be able to adjust our cryptography as needs be because cryptographic attacks are now a very real thing. And there is a very real possibility that the cryptographic algorithms that we settle on as we move away from RSA and ECC are not the things we're using in 10 years.
That's so
and
true,
and
Tim.
we may have to change. And I try to tell everybody, get used to an idea that our cryptography needs to be updatable the exact same way that our software is updatable. And the exact same way that there might be a 0 day and you have to go and you have to deploy a patch, there might be the equivalent of a cryptographic 0 day where we have to go make a cryptographic upgrade date, and we need to do it not on a predetermined schedule that everybody knew decades ago, but like in the next few months. And this is the world we need to get to, where we can do this, all of our electronic systems globally, societally, where we can do this.
Tim, I bet you that the majority of Active Directory certificate services systems that have been implemented have probably been sitting there doing their normal day jobs for a decade or more.
Right.
And that was normal.
Yep.
We're never going to live in an age past right now where that's going to be the case. And I think that, when our beloved marketing department came up with the title for this third bullet, the reason I didn't challenge it is because I agree with the sense that this idea of manually setting and forget something is smushing together two ideas. One of them is cryptographic agility, which is what you just described perfectly,
Right.
and also the problem of certificate agility as well, meaning
Yeah.
that without automation, without certificate agility, you cannot have cryptographic agility. And so therefore, even problems that we're seeing right now, Tim, with regards to shortened certificate lifespans for publicly trusted certificates, the issues around manually setting and forgetting things, the way things were done in past decades, that will not survive the future. And that's just, again, this is a slide that we could probably take all day
Yeah.
just to discuss some of those important topics, but we're just touching
In
it here.
fact, we kind of are. So let's go ahead. What's Microsoft doing with PQC?
Yeah. So, Tim, it wasn't that long ago when you and I were saying, hey, when's NIST going to drop the standards? What are going to be the future quantum resistant cryptographic algorithms? Well, they were released, Tim, last year, the
Mhm.
first batch.
Yep.
And that's what that first point here is, that the standards exist and we're going to have alignment with them. And we need to be targeting transition. And I would say it says here by 2033, Gartner is saying 2029. NIST itself is deprecating RSA and ECC. The first wave of deprecations happening 2030. So this 2033 date, my marketing department is giving you the easy one here by saying 2033. I would say that by 2029, you need to start thinking about some systems actually fully transitioning away from legacy RSA and ECC. And that's why we talk about here is that there will probably be phases of transition. So when you're taking inventory of your cryptographic assets across, you must have some form of Microsoft stack going on. You need to start looking at RSA and ECC across that stack. And it's going to be interesting, Tim. It's just part of the complexity of how do you start to prioritize systems within your enterprise environment for phasing away from RSA and ECC and into these newer NIST standards.
Yeah. Okay. And let's drill down on internal PKI.
So, Tim, part of the work that is needed, and those of you who know Active Directory certificate services, you know it well. Some of the things that Microsoft have said about what they're going to promise you, it still requires you to upgrade your Active Directory certificate services certificate templates. That's going to be a lot of work, Tim, because setting up those templates was a major job of standing up ADCS itself. And that's one of the reasons why ADCS is so sticky, because nobody wants to have to redo this task, but it will be required. One of the things that you may want to be considering is the usage of hybrid certificates. And that is a huge question mark around how ADCS will actually express that and actually implement that. I think that that is in the middle of this slide, but there's a big question mark about how PQC from the standpoint of utilizing hybrid certificates, and even when you would use it, why you would use it, and whether or not Microsoft's going to support it fully are big question marks.
And
And then,
Jason, to be clear, when we say hybrid here, what we mean at a high level is, imagine you may have systems that are talking to a variety of other systems, and those systems they talk to have heterogeneous levels of PQC support. So there will be a period of time which will span for years, and it may span for a lot of years in some cases, where my server might attach to one system that is PQC capable, but in an hour later attached to another system somewhere else that is not PQC capable. So imagine a situation where you step up to PQC in the event that both sides are able to do it, but in the event that they're not, you step down to the old RSA or ECC in order to have systems that continue to run while we transition them. Because the other alternative, like switching everything on the same day, just can't happen, right? So we need to have something where we have a system that can sort of speak both languages, if you will, for some period of time.
and it really is going to be an important bridge technology for legacy systems that will never be able to speak PQC.
Yeah.
And will only ever speak RSA and ECC, but where you want to take advantage of post-quantum standards. Yeah. So that is absolutely the purpose. You're dead right. So thanks for that. I would say that then thinking about upgrading the ADCS templates, contemplating whether or not Microsoft will support hybrid certificates within the Microsoft stack, and then thinking about how you're going to transition these things through time, the major challenge for all forms of internal private certificate authorities too.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So enter CLM.
Yeah. So Tim, when you're talking about modern PKI, the old saying you and I have said a few times, this ain't your grandpa's PKI.
Right.
This might be a big shock to many of you, but Active Directory certificate services kind of remain static for years and years and years. And PKI did not stand still, Tim. For our purposes, we like to think about private certificate authorities within the context of certificate lifecycle management. We really don't separate the context. So remember you and I earlier in this webinar, Tim, talked about the problem of visibility.
Yeah.
And that visibility issue was due to the fact that Active Directory Certificate Services was really built for one operating system with that Microsoft-centric view of the world. Think of Steve Ballmer, Bill Gates, over their dead bodies, was any operating system other than Windows ever going to exist in this world? Well, that world's not the one we live in anymore. And therefore, having a single pane of glass across all of your disparate operating systems, all of your on-premise, cloud, hybrid. Tim, we live in a world where there's so many different computing systems and we don't even bother to think about it much anymore. Well, having a single pane of glass across all of it and using certificate lifecycle management as a concept completely brings back this capability of having true governance in a single pane of glass for all of your digital trust. Having the concept, Tim, of not having to worry about, hey, where are my certificates coming from? Is my certificate lifecycle management certificate agnostic? That's important. You need to realize that Microsoft thought about a world where only one CA was ever going to exist, only one operating system was ever going to exist, Tim. That's just not the world we live in.
Yeah, right, exactly. And again, it's a very 2005 kind of concept. And in that kind of time frame, you absolutely could, or a 2010 kind of concept, just not true anymore. All right, so uh and so SCM and ADS, how does CLM like SCM help you with your problems with ADCS?
Tim, I'm going to start with the right hand side of the slide because it's probably it's an option for you. You could replace Active Directory certificate services today with a cloud native Sectigo private certificate authority. You could simply do a rip and replace. But I fully realize that for many of you who've signed up to this webinar, that's perhaps not why you're here, right?
Mhm.
If that's something you're considering, no problem. Come and talk with us. We can absolutely talk about that scenario. The more interesting one to me, quite often, Tim, is one where you can have both Active Directory certificate services, which is probably never going to go away in any of our careers for a whole lot of enterprises that are out there today. And the way to solve this visibility problem, the way to solve the PQC problem, the way to solve the certificate agility problem, the way to solve the certificate agility problem, Tim, is to augment Active Directory certificate services with a cloud-based Sectigo private CA, which offers seamless integration into ADCS
Right.
and takes ADCS, Tim, and actually makes it for the modern world. That is CA agnostic, the ability to have visibility across multiple private CAs, the ability to provision certificates into non-Microsoft operating systems, and the ability to have cryptographic agility. Tim, that's the promise of augmenting certificate management capabilities with Sectigo's private CA and its tight integration into ADCS. That's really the heart of this webinar today, is to make people aware that that is an option for you and an important one.
Yeah, and this, of course, gives you the advantage that everything you've built around your ADCS keeps working, right? But you can sort of, you can unify it with the stuff that ADCS won't service, and you can manage it all together in a single place. So, talk about these use cases.
Yeah, so Tim, Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates never dreamt of these use cases, which is what happens if you're using and needing a private certificate authority for DevOps scenarios, DevOps use cases. What happens if you are automating SMIME certificates? What happens if you need operating system support? We're talking about Android, we're talking about iOS, we're talking about Linux, obviously, within the cloud, within hybrid systems. These are normal, absolutely drop dead normal, everyday use cases that are probably in
Yeah.
every enterprise right now, Tim. I would say there's probably not an enterprise in the world that doesn't have one or all three of these use cases. And my goodness, Active Directory Certificate Services has extremely limited coverage across these. And the way to bring all these into the modern world and bring certificates to all these use cases, Tim, is to have a modern private CA augmenting your Active Directory certificate services, and then you can address these modern use cases.
Yeah, and automation, a lot of benefits come from automation. I like this slide because it sort of walks you through the many things that you get when you have automation. So I always like to emphasize, and you feel free to tell me if you don't agree, Jason, but I emphasize, I think the most compelling um, business case for automation is simply that your risk of downtime goes down, right? More uptime. And uptime is so valuable, right? Outages are so costly in so many ways. They disrupt business, they prevent customers from being serviced, they directly cost revenue, they directly lead to SLA violations or compliance violations. They can lead to security breaches. Like all of this stuff are real consequences of downtime. The consequences are very high. Lost employee and productivity, increased help desk tickets. And so just plain more uptime, less problems, less trouble is the number one benefit of automation, but it's not the only one. And another big one is just efficiency, just human time, right? People's are very valuable. And there tends to be a wide sweeping IT skills gap where it's hard to hire people who have the skills that you need to do everything that business has an appetite to do because there just aren't enough humans who can do it. And so, if we can have our humans spending less time deploying and managing certificates and more time doing other things, that winds up being very valuable to the company as a whole. Not only because we're getting our work done more efficiency, but there's this opportunity cost benefit where we can get to things that we otherwise couldn't get to. And then a third one that's really valuable is we talked about agility earlier on, right? If something massive happens, let's say a Heartbleed style problem occurs, we've got to do massive things to our certificates right away. Um, the fact that I can push a button and have tens of thousands of certificates swapped out in the next hour is radically different from doing the same thing over the course of the next month. And so that is, very beneficial, even setting aside the human productivity and the opportunity cost, excuse me. It's just plain that we can be agile and the stuff we need done quickly can get done quickly. There's lots of reasons why this is better. Then you've got things like visibility and reporting and the ability to prove that I did the things I said I was going to do. There's lots of benefits that come from automation.
Tim, I'm just looking up as you're saying that how long ago you and I did a podcast that was titled What is Total Certificate Agility?
Oh, geez. 4
That
years?
was hey, Tim, it was November 12th, 2020, episode 128. What is Total
5 years.
Certificate Agility?
5 years. Okay.
5 years ago.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and this has been a concept that was kind of our coinage at the time, but it's a concept that's moved into sort of the common parlance now, where people think in these terms, which is better. I think it's healthier for us that we do. All right, so PQC transition. So transitioning to PQC, Jason.
Yes. So those of you who keep track of Sectigo, is something that with Sectigo Quantum Labs, Tim, something you and I had announced along with some of our colleagues a while ago. Something that's really important to us is really all about enabling cryptographic agility today. And so the whole concept of certificate lifecycle management delivers on that promise of certificate agility that you just went through in great detail. And therefore, you cannot think about preparing for the post-quantum era without thinking about certificate agility. One of our sayings, Tim, is you cannot have cryptographic agility without certificate agility. And that's what this first point is really all about. Also, with Sectigo's private CA systems and Sectigo Quantum Labs today, support for hybrid certificates, support for the new PQC algorithms that have been standardized by NIST. And of course, if you combine that with our ability to integrate tightly into Microsoft Active Directory Certificate Services, the ability to then start to test rollouts that include ADCS in the background, Tim, is really key. And I think I just want to double tap, Tim, on this third point. Humor me for a moment. I want to describe something that's not on this slide, but it's worth talking about. Some of you who will say to me, Jay, I love the cloud native concept of Sectigo's private CA. However, I don't want my root to be anywhere other than where it has been for the last 15 to 20 years. There's a blade I've got in my enterprise IT environment. It's an ADCS based system. It's on-prem. I want to hold it close to my chest. That private key that exists on that box is going to sit there forever. Okay, great. For those of you who have that requirement for one reason or another, I'm not going to argue with that reason. You might have that reason that might be a hard reason that we cannot change. And it might even be psychological based reasons. That's fine. I don't care. Let's address that, Tim. By having these stage rollouts, we can actually, as part of this augmentation concept that we've been talking about here, augment it in such a way where that really important, never going anywhere route that is ADCS based can actually serve to sign a cloud-based modern Sectigo private CA, Tim. So therefore, you can actually have offline routes that you hold close to your chest that are ADCS based, and all that does is sign modern issuing CAs. And I think, Tim, for a staged rollout that embraces all these modern capabilities, that might be one of the smartest ways for those of you who cannot get away from ADCS completely. It's minimizing what ADCS does down to its absolute most secure architecture, which is it merely signs a modern cloud-based private CA issuing CA. And that, Tim, I think is a very architecturally interesting way of solving this problem as a later staged rollout.
Okay. Okay. All right. This is our quant um, framework, and I think this is worth hitting real quick. This is sort of the steps to go through to being able to make a system like your internal PKI, for instance, PQC ready. And we're in the beginning steps here right now. We're talking about know your cryptographic footprint, the Q for quantum exposure inventory, uncover the risk, assess the vulnerabilities, right? The QU is where we are now. As we figure these things out, then we're able to build a prioritized list about it, assess and strategize. We need to actually be able to implement, navigate implementation, and then you get in sort of long-term maintenance, track and management. So, it's got a handy acronym, it's easy to remember, and it's a good way to think about the stages that you have to go through to get any part of your environment to be PQC ready. So, this is worth introducing and making the audience aware of.
Yeah, Tim, I think I like to consider the quant strategy as being a handy dandy, kind of easy to think about way of interpreting
Yeah.
everybody else's guidance documents, which can sometimes get very prescriptive and in the weeds and not as easy to understand. There's so many different guidance documents around the world right now that are calling for first step being take inventory of your cryptographic assets. Well, guess what? That's the Q. That's our advice is the same thing. And if you think across what the other steps are, as you said, Tim, this is just a nice, easy, handy dandy way of thinking through the steps at a high level rather than getting into the weeds and getting confused about what the guidance documents are actually trying to tell you. This is it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And I think this is how how SCM enters into this.
Yeah. So when you think about Sectigo's cloud native certificate lifecycle management system, our flagship product, SCM, one of its greatest strengths, Tim, as one of the 5 pillars of PLM, is being able to give visibility. Therefore, discovering and making an assessment of your cryptographic assets, Tim. That Q and quant, well, we deliver that through our product. The ability to actually test PQC systems. What's the latency of an issuance like? Does it work with your systems? The ability to upgrade capabilities so that you can put certificates into more places than ADCS ever could, the ability to address other operating systems, the ability to address the cloud, and the ability to have extremely flexible rollouts in that story of augmentation that I was trying to point out at the end of that last slide. Therefore, all those things, that quant way of thinking about what it is you have to do to prepare for cryptographic agility, these are the capabilities that are powered by our flagship product, SCM.
Yeah. And here's some of the other benefits we get from SCM.
Yeah, Tim, if you're not supporting NIST's current standards, well, then you're basically you're missing out. And so therefore our system will support those standards. It'll allow you to have centralized policies that are not just in the stuck in the Microsoft stack, based on a cloud native modern architecture. And Tim, what we're always going to be to promise you, a promise that I'm not sure is as rock solid made by Microsoft right now, but this ability to future proof and to say what will be the cryptographic algorithms that we're using in 2030, 2035, 2040, as these
Right.
private CAs continue to be used, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the benefits that comes both with CLM and with a managed PKI solution, right? Is that someone who is in the business of keeping current with this stuff continues to keep current with it basically on your behalf. I think we may have hit this slide already. Shall I move
Yeah,
on?
Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can move on.
Yeah. And so, this is kind of a concluding slide. To emphasize a point you already made, Jason, th- this is today's problem. This is
It's a
today's problem because 2030 isn't that far away. This is today's problem because we need to deal with problems like harvest and decrypt and trust now forge later that are could already be attacks that are being levied against us right now.
Let's talk about a right now problem, Tim. Let's forget PQC is even something to prepare for. Right
Okay.
here we are on a
Okay.
conclusion slide, and I'm telling you just to imagine PQC is not even a thing.
Okay.
Let's say that you are, Tim, one of our many customers, one of our many people who might have signed up to this webinar who are actively using Active Directory certificate services.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard about all the limitations, Tim. You and I covered the limitations. Here's one we didn't even cover yet, but I'm going to cover it on the conclusion slide. If you've come with us this far, here's a little gift for you to think about.
Okay.
Tim, how often is the private key that is the basis of the root certificate of ADCS issued and protected by an HSM, a hardware security module?
Well, I would hope most of the time. I mean, it would like it to be. Should be.
I would bet you, Tim, I would bet you it's less than 10%.
Okay.
And that's unbelievable to me. Never mind PQC, Tim. In your own words, Tim, what's the implications of having a software protected and a software stored private key for your ADCS root? What's the risks there?
Well, the risk there is that that key gets stolen. Like even setting aside the PQC problem, the risk is that key gets stolen and you don't know it, right? And then at that point, you've got kind of an ongoing uh, attack that can be performed over and over again. That is extraordinarily difficult to detect and really impossible to defend against without throwing it all out and starting again.
Tim, you and I had a podcast October 21st, 2021. Root Causes podcast 183 was titled New MSCA Attack Toolkits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what we described there was a set of PowerShell scripts written by white hat attackers that actually highlighted this problem of Did you configure your MSCA without an HSM? Just that's like question one of several hundred questions that attack toolkit asks. Well, what happens, Tim, if I told you that when you stood up a cloud native Sectigo SCM based private CA, the root of roots is actually issued and protected by an HSM by default.
Right. Yep, it is.
We don't allow you to make that fundamental error that the majority of you make with your ADCS implementations. That's not even a PQC based conversation, Tim. It's the fundamental problem behind most ADCS implementations. And for those of you listening to this podcast, this webinar still, you know it. You know that that's your original sin. And so therefore, augmenting your ADCS with a modern private CA, boy, that is cheap insurance to not just protecting you against the future of PQC, but it's against your major security hole that exists there right now.
All right. You and I can talk forever, but we do need to leave time for questions. So, just real quick, if this sort of subject matter is interesting to you, PQC, private CA, certificates, HSMs, strategies around roots, all the stuff we've talked about today, then come join us at the Root Causes podcast. Jason and I put up new episodes every week, and we go into all manner of detail of all kinds of things around this world. We have more than 500 episodes published, so you got a big backlog you can dive into and binge on. You also have new material coming all the time. It's wherever you listen to podcasts. Root Causes, please come join us. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
All right, we got a handful of questions here. Let's jump into these. All right, first one. We would like to stand up a new ADCS server for private CA only, likely for a handful of server-to-server communications like LD APS. Do you see an issue with it?
I sure do. I would love to ask one question for a net new ADCS stand up, which is, are you standing that up with an HSM? Are you at all concerned about PQC? Are you concerned with the roadmap, Microsoft's roadmap towards PQC? It's amazing to me, Tim, that you and I quite often talk about, Tim, ADCS from the standpoint of the ones that have been there for 15 years, and because
Yeah,
nobody knew how to do anything any better back then. But
yeah.
people are still asking the question today: should I stand up ADCS today for a system running today?
So, what do you recommend instead, Jason?
I would recommend going directly towards a cloud native private certificate authority that is CLM based. That is our flagship product, Sectigo SCM. You are a absolute down the center of the target customer for that product. You really should be evaluating a modern private CA.
All right. Hey, Jason, I got a question. So
Yeah.
earlier on, a lot of slides back, you talked about the fact that we were going to have to go basically redo our templates. And you threw off this thing to say that that's most of the work of creating an ADCS instance in the first place. So if we're going to have to go change our templates, and that's most of the work to begin with, does that mean that rather than migrating to an ADCS support for PQC, would this be the time to evaluate moving on to a different, as you say, more modern PKI system?
For those of you, let's think about the three scenarios, Tim, to answer that question. For those of you thinking about net new systems, think about the amount of work you're saving by not having to stand up all of those GPO templates. You won't have to do it with a modern private CA. You just won't have to do it. Modern private CAs don't need all that Active Directory legacy. For those of you who have legacy and you want to augment it, our integration seamlessly works with your existing GPOs.
Mhm.
That's the good news. And for those of you who want to rip and replace, well, just think about all those GPOs that you no longer have to think about, Tim. Hallelujah.
Okay. All right. Next question.
All right, so this one's a little long, so hang with me. So, how does SCM support highly regulated or secure network businesses such as health, finance, federal government that may have some or all components running in air-gap scenarios that can't support cloud or SaaS-based solutions?
Tim, it's interesting in that there's almost no regulated industry right now that says absolute 100% air gap. I would say, Tim, one of the few industries that truly sometimes need a absolutely 100%, I need a PKI in a box, and that box can't be touched by anything except the system that it's in, is actually manufacturing. Manufacturing environments that might be in jurisdictions that aren't friendly to ours,
Mhm.
where that box can't be accessed by anything other than literally the moving parts within the manufacturing environment. Systems such as financial systems, healthcare systems, other regulated industries, I would challenge anybody who says that complete air gap is what's being asked for in those environments. Because Tim, have you ever heard of a modern financial system that was air gap to one system? It just, it actually doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what let me give you one example, Tim, and then I'll let you go on this topic yourself, which is, I would say that highly specialized PKI, such as, let's call it, citizen ID systems or passport systems. Yeah, I would say that you're going to need a very specialized PKI for that. But for the use cases we spoke about in this webinar, authentication-based use cases, there's no such thing. No such thing as air-gapped authentication across an enterprise, even in regulated industries, Tim.
Okay. Fair enough. Next question.
So, what will it look like to upgrade to new crypto versions for our SCM root CAs in the future? Is that a rollout of a whole new CA?
I am going to ask you to come back and ask that question in the next short while. Our product people are going to have a very good description of exactly what the migration mechanisms are going to be. And everybody right now is, I'm going to say, Tim, this is quite interesting. We're actually still at the patent stage and IETF key exchange mechanism stage of understanding what the standards for that will be, what the new intellectual property will be to actually perform that kind of mechanism. I would say right now, to better understand how it will probably happen for most legacy systems, is to go back and look at what Tim and I said about hybrid certificates, which will probably be the majority of the ways in which that mechanism is covered. However, there will be other modern ways coming. Stay tuned, and we're going to be talking about that down the road.
Yeah, I don't think we had a slide on that, did we? All right. Well,
Well, when we talk about hybrid
it's okay.
certificates.
We'll move on. Next question.
All right, so a little bit about augmenting. So I'm worried about having to maintain two systems if we add SCM on top of our ADCS. Can you speak to the workload involved with augmenting ADCS and with SCM?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I am so proud to say that it's probably one of our most extensive and seamless integrations that SCM has as our flagship product. The ability to actually plug in to your existing Microsoft CA and have it just work is, like I say, it's something that I'm personally proud to work at Sectigo and say that the workload to make that happen, the ability to just stand it up, watch it be able to integrate within the GPOs, watch the certificate profiles that are required in ADCS be automatically stood up and understood and recognized. It is really quite remarkable. how SCM gives you automatic visibility into your ADCS certificates that you just never had before. It's actually the opposite of a workload. It's the reverse of a workload in the sense that once you stand the system up very, very rapidly, you start to get the benefits of a modern private CA on top of ADCS. It's just, it works great.
All right, so with that, we're at time. So thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jason. That was an awesome presentation. Everybody, this was recorded, so we'll send out the recording to you as soon as we have that live. And if we didn't get to a question you have, feel free to reach out to your AE or contact us on our website. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.